Under a gray sky thick with the stench of smoke, Smoketown, a once lush region nestled in the heart of Americas, become a faded portrait of life. It was once home to sprawling flower fields, barefoot children running through the grass, and the hum of bees echoing through every spring. But all of that has slipped into the past, swallowed by towering smokestacks and factories that run day and night without pause. There is no longer any place for trees to take root. The wildflowers that once lined the roadside have been replaced by cold, lifeless concrete. No birds sing here, and the tiny bees that once brushed against each bloom are nowhere to be seen. Pollinators have retreated, leaving the town in a silence so monotonous, it's painful. In the midst of this harsh picture, one name still lingers, spoken with a mix of admiration and, at times, pity. Mr. Thomas, the last beekeeper of the town. In his 60s, his silver hair always tucked beneath a worn-out mesh beekeeping hat. He lives in a small wooden house on the outskirts of town, a place many say has been forgotten by nature. Every day, Mr. Thomas drives his old pickup truck, carrying hives strapped to the back, journeying dozens of miles in search of clean flowers. He doesn't do it for profit. Honey is no longer in high demand, and beekeeping barely provides a living. But he keeps going, because he believes if a single colony of bees still lives, then so does a chance for this place to survive. In a town forsaken by nature, Mr. Thomas is the last heartbeat, quiet but unyielding. Each morning, while Smoketown is still trapped in its dusty slumber and the drone of machinery, Mr. Thomas begins his familiar journey. His pickup truck rattles gently down the gravel-strewn roads, the hives behind him softly vibrating with life. The drive takes him far, far from factories, far from noise, not for commerce, but to search for a small remnant of nature that still breathes. In the distant hills, untouched by industrial hands, Mr. Thomas guards a hidden spot where wildflowers still bloom in early summer, where grass still whispers in the wind, and where bees can still fly without choking on smoke. It is the last oasis he can bring his bees to. But to him, this isn't just about work or honey. Beekeeper Mr. Thomas is a mission, a small but resolute act in a world that's forgotten the sound of life. Each time he opens the hive lid and watches the tiny bees flutter out, he whispers, "Go now, little girls, find the flowers and live." He called the bees the little girls because he knew that most worker bees were female, and he always spoke to them as if they were old friends. He confided in them while sprinkling water around the hive, while replacing wax, while checking the honey. Words spoken into the silence, yet he believed they listened and understood. "You are the last souls left," he had once whispered. "If you disappear, this town will truly die." He carried a notebook not to record prices or honey yields, but to track where flowers still bloomed, which regions still held pollen. Each dot on the map was a flicker of hope, proof that nature had not entirely abandoned humanity. Each evening upon returning home, he would carefully check each hive. On days when a few bees didn't return, he wouldn't close the hive right away. He waited, as if expecting something greater than a single bee, perhaps, a reminder that life was still trying, even in silence. In a town ruled by smoke and machines, Mr. Thomas and his bees still flew persistently, if holding on to one last dream that someone had forgotten. Then, on a gloomy afternoon, with gray smoke from the factories thick enough to shroud the far hilltops, Mr. Thomas pulled his truck over to the side of the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly as a broadcast came through on his old crackling radio. The Smoketown Council has approved plans for a new bioenergy plant. The proposed site is the western Fieldon area that still contains some remaining patches of natural vegetation. He knew exactly where that was. They called it the empty lot. But to him and his bees, It was the last wildflower field. A stretch of land scattered with purple daisies, dandelions, and a few lavender bushes, clinging to life thanks to a faint underground spring. Every season, his bees returned there as if it were their second home, a place where they could work, rest, and truly live. When the news spread, most townspeople didn't seem to care. They spoke only of new jobs, economic gains, and promises of sustainable development. Some even chuckled when Mr. Thomas mentioned the bee field. Who needs bees anymore? That old man lives in a fairy tale. Their words twisted something inside him, not because of the ridicule, but because of how easily people had forgotten the most fundamental truths, that without bees, there are no flowers. Without flowers, no fruit. And without fruit, even dinner tables would become artificial, filled with synthetic food and artificial flavors. That night, back at home, he opened his old notebook and flipped through the pages where he had documented that very field. March, early dandelion bloom. April, honey yield slightly increased. May, bee return numbers higher than last year. The handwriting wavered, simple and unadorned, but every line read like a plea cry for help from a world on the edge. That night, Mr. Thomas couldn't sleep. His mind was flooded with visions. Flowers crushed beneath bulldozer treads, the disoriented buzzing of bees with no hive to return to, and a sky left hollow, absent of golden wings. His heart ached. For years he had driven his bees dozens of miles just to escape the smog of the town, just to preserve a sliver of untouched beauty, and now they planned to erase even that. No more places to go. No more flowers left to find. The next morning, Mr. Thomas stood in front of his hive. The bees flew out and landed gently on his hand, as if they understood the sorrow resting in their keeper's heart. He gently stroked the back of a worker bee and whispered, "I won't let you lose your home, not this time." From that moment on, he knew what he had to do, not just to save a field, but to protect the last fragment of life. Under the hazy shroud of smoke that blanketed Smoketown, Mr. Thomas sat quietly at his old wooden table, carefully writing each line by hand. The letter to the town officials wasn't long, nor was it ornate. Just the sincere words of an old beekeeper who still believed in the value of a wildflower field in a world painted in gray. I petition to preserve the western wildflower field, not for myself, but for the bees struggling to survive, and for the children who deserve to know what a real flower smells like. He signed the letter with a trembling but resolute hand. Thomas H., the last beekeeper. But he didn't stop there. He went door to door, seeking out the neighborhood leaders, people he had once helped fix fences, people to whom he had gifted jars of honey during Thanksgiving. He brought with him small packets of seeds, asking them to plant just a few patches of flowers near their homes. Not much, just 1 square meter, so the bees can find their way back. Some nodded out of respect for the man, but most just smiled wistfully and said, "Who cares about bees and flowers these days, Mr. Thomas?" Undeterred, he organized a small talk at the town's cultural hall, a worn-out room with a faded portrait of a former president hanging on the wall. He brought trays of honey, a hand-drawn map of places where bees had once found flowers, and the wooden hive box he had used since he was a young man. Only 4 people came. 3 elderly folks and a curious child tagging along with her grandmother. No one asked many questions. They just sat and listened quietly, then left without a word. That night, Mr. Thomas returned home, placing packets of daisy, butterfly bush, and lavender seeds on a small shelf outside his porch. Beneath the dim porch light, he began digging tiny holes, carefully planting each seed into the earth. He wasn't expecting miracles. He just didn't want silence. The next day, A few people walking past his old wooden house stopped in their tracks. On the dusty front yard, patches of freshly turned soil stood out amidst the withered grass marks left by someone who had recently planted something. An old woman stopped her bicycle, let out a soft sigh, and murmured, "He still hasn't given up." And yes, even standing alone amid the smoke and dust, Mr. Thomas began again with the very first blossoms, and with the belief that someone out there would hear the bees calling, if only we had the patience to sow hope. A few weeks after the quiet gathering at the town's cultural center, while Smoketown still lay buried in haze and noise, something small but extraordinary happened on Mr. Thomas's front porch. Amid brittle shrubs and cracked soil, a single pale lavender flower quietly bloomed. Its delicate petals trembled in the soft breeze, like a hushed whisper from nature trying to speak again. Mr. Thomas didn't say a word. He just sat still on his wooden bench, his eyes glistening with silent emotion. His hand gently lifted the flower's stem, as though he were touching a fragile miracle, something more precious than anything else left in this town. And then on the following morning, he heard it. Not machinery, not construction trucks, but the soft, unmistakable hum of wings, real wings fluttering gently through the air, circling the newly bloomed flower. A bee, then two, then a whole small swarm, but real. They looped around his front yard as if searching for old memories of lost blooming seasons. Mr. Thomas chuckled softly, in awe and in hope. The bees had caught wind of life stirring again. That afternoon, a neighbor boy, the same one who had come to the community talk with his grandmother, ran up to him, clutching an empty plastic jar. His eyes sparkled as he looked up and asked, "Mister, can I have some flower seeds? I want to plant them on our balcony." Mr. Thomas was speechless. He opened a small wooden box and placed a seed packet into the boy's hands, then knelt to show him how to mix the soil, how to water gently each day. It was the first time in a long while he had passed something on, not for science, but for a heart still willing to listen. In the days that followed, more people slowed their steps as they passed his yard. They saw real flowers blooming, not plastic decorations, not poster images, but small blossoms releasing sweet fragrance, calling the bees home. A young mother stood by the road, showing her child the real bees in flight. A middle-aged mignon who had once mocked Mr. Thomas quietly came to ask for a few seeds, saying he wanted to give it a try. And just like that, blooms began appearing along the sidewalk, small patches, corner gardens, forgotten planters springing back to life. No one gave orders. No slogans were needed. It was simple. When a flower blooms, the bees return. And when the bees return, people begin to listen. The signals of nature never disappear. They simply wait for someone patient enough to sow the first seed of life again. One early summer morning, just as golden sunlight stretched over the tin rooftops of the gray buildings, something extraordinary happened in Smoketown. The buzzing sound spread through the air, not faint or sporadic anymore, but clear, steady, like a lively symphony written with wings. Swarms of bees blanketed the wildflowers along the roadside, fluttered around the lavender vines in front of Mr. Thomas's house, dancing like musical notes against the rare pale blue sky of a town long accustomed only to smoke. People blinked in surprise as they opened their windows. Commuters pulled over to the roadside. Everyone looked up, stunned. For the first time in years, the sound did not come from the factories, it came from nature. Children poured out of their homes, cheering, counting each bee in delight. That familiar buzzing once lost had returned like a wake-up call. Local media quickly arrived. A group of reporters set up their cameras right outside Mr. Thomas's gate, capturing close-up shots of the bees working diligently, the blooming flowers, and the smiles on the faces of residents, expressions the town hadn't seen in a very long time. That evening's headline blared across the local news. Bees' return to Smoketown life is coming back. The clip of Mr. Thomas, the old beekeeper, with the flower-filled yard was shared widely across social media. His story, once that of a lonely man in an indifferent town, became a symbol of hope. Public pressure began to grow. Letters, petitions, and signatures flooded City Hall, calling for the preservation of the last wildflower field. For the first time, the voice of the people was not ignored. And then an official announcement was released. The plan to build the new factory would be postponed for a full review of zoning and development. The town erupted not in celebration of victory, but in relief, because they knew nature had spoken, and this time, humanity had finally listened. From a small swarm of bees, from a patch of wildflowers, from the yard of an old beekeeper, an entire movement was born. Planting flowers, protecting bees, and living in harmony with nature was no longer a dream, but a real and necessary choice to save themselves. Right in the heart of Smoketown, a place once known only for its smog and the hiss of machines, something unimaginable began to take root, a true ecological zone rising from the ashes. Thanks to community pressure and the impact of media coverage, the last wildflower field was officially designated for conservation by the town authorities. A new sign was erected at the entrance of the meadow. Community Ecological Zone, where the bees return, life begins. No one waited. Residents from across the neighborhood sprang into action. Elderly locals brought seeds they had kept from backyard gardens. Young people volunteered to till the soil, create pathways, and build bamboo fences to protect the area. Children ran around, watering plants and painting small signs for each flower patch. "Please don't step on me. I'm calling the bees." That ecological zone wasn't built with money, it was built with hope. There were no architect's blueprints, no advice from urban development firms, but every square foot of land bore the handprints of the people. Every cluster of flowers carried memories of mothers, grandmothers, and a time when nature was still cherished. And at the heart of it all was Mr. Thomas. He didn't receive any official title, wasn't formally appointed, but everyone affectionately called him the beekeeper of the town. With his gentle smile and sun-darkened hands, he led groups of children through rows of flowers, teaching them how to recognize worker bees, how to distinguish real nectar from synthetic fragrance. He told them stories about bees, those tiny creatures that carry a piece of the planet's survival on their fragile wings. Under his guidance, the first hives were installed at the edges of the field. Locals learned to keep their distance, avoid pesticides, and let the weeds grow freely because, as he said, weeds are also home to butterflies, to worms, to the soil. And so, every morning, that once barren stretch of land no longer lay silent. It buzzed with bees, rang with children's laughter, and hummed with the sound of hope, something Smoketown thought it had lost forever. That spring, for the first time in decades, Smoketown could smell the scent of real flowers. Not the artificial fragrance of commercial products, but the aroma of lavender, daisies, rosemary carried on the morning breeze, weaving through the streets, awakening hearts long dulled by dust and machinery. The wildflower field had been revived. It wasn't symmetrical, not perfect like pre-planned city parks, but its wild, spontaneous beauty moved people deeply. Splashes of purple, yellow, and white danced under the sunlight, swaying gently as the bees returned. They flew in clusters, their buzzing painting freeform shapes across the sky, unprogrammed and alive. Children in town now woke up early to greet the bees. They brought their notebooks to the ecological zone, recording the names of flowers and insects. Teachers stood silently nearby, realizing that the truest lessons in nature weren't in textbooks but in every petal, in every glimmer of light on a bee's wing. At the center of the garden, Mr. Thomas stood in stillness. His hands were no longer as quick as they once were, but his eyes still held warmth. In front of him, the beesants, a burden, once a worry, were now living out their sacred role, keeping the heartbeat of life. In one fleeting moment, a bee landed gently on his shoulder. He smiled softly, made no move to brush it away. It was a silent thank you shared between two beings who had weathered the ashes together. The townspeople gathered. A wooden sign was placed at the entrance to the flower field with a handwritten message. To save a hive of bees is to save a piece of life. No one asked who had written the sign, but everyone knew. It was Mr. Thomas's words, no signature needed, because the entire town remembered. And so, from one small beehive amidst smoke and skepticism, an entire town learned to listen to nature again. They learned to slow down and hold on to what truly matters. Not just the bees, but life itself. Every gentle breath, fragile yet persistent, still needs people like Mr. Thomas to keep existing. If the story of Mr. Thomas and his little bees touched your heart, like this video as a show of support for those quietly protecting life. Share it to spread the message. To protect the bees is to protect our future. And subscribe to our channel so we can keep telling powerful stories of nature, resilience, and hope. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that just might change the way you see the world. Know